Since we bought our house, we've been working on building the backyard of our dreams. So far we've built a gym, a shed, put up a fence, and now we're working on the screened-in patio because the mosquitoes here don't mess around. It's been a massive learning curve and we've saved a lot of money DIYing everything, but let's see if things turn out as good as one of those expensive contractors. In the previous video, we built the entire exterior of the screened-in patio, and in this video, we're going to build out the inside, do tile work, add a grill, a smart irrigation system, and a bunch of other stuff. So stick around because I'm going to show you exactly how much we spent on this entire project at the end of this video. Now that the patio is framed out and screened in, we're going to build out the inside. It's really nice to have this blank canvas so we can do whatever we want, so we're going to take advantage of it and see how nice we can make this thing. So far we spent $5,621 building the exterior of this patio, and that includes the half-inch sheathing that I'm screwing into the walls. They're going to be covered in stucco, but I'll show you that later on in the video. We next had to frame out the island that we're going to install in the center of this patio, which will be 24 inches wide by 7 feet long. I built the entire frame out of pressure treated 2x4s and secured them together using 3.5-inch exterior decking screws, then repeated the same process over and over until all the frame pieces were put together. All the pressure treated 2x4s and screws for the framing ran as $216, which brings the total to $5,837 so far, which is still just over $16,000 cheaper than a contractor quoted me. But we still have a lot to do, so let's see if we can stay well under the original $22,000 quote. After I finished framing, I screwed all the pieces together, and I had to make sure this island is perfectly level because later in the video I'm going to be pouring a concrete countertop over this frame and I don't want it to settle funny. Once the framing was leveled, I pre-drilled and used 4-inch concrete screws to secure the framing to the concrete slab. Then just like that, the framing to the island was all finished up. Now that the framing is finished, I pre-drilled some holes into the studs so I can run some electrical. But since this patio is screened in, that doesn't make it waterproof. So I decided to run the electrical inside of this conduit and these waterproof boxes. Just in case we end up getting a storm one day and everything gets wet, I just want to prevent issues. And it isn't even that much more expensive. All the electrical for this entire patio build ended up running me $192, which brings the total to $6,033 so far. And for a full disclaimer, I'm not a professional electrician, I just felt like this was the right thing to do, which might be overkill, but what else are you gonna do when you got millions of people watching your videos critiquing every single thing you do? Just say fuck and do it anyway. For the wire I used Romex 12-2, then used my snake to go all the way to the other side of the conduit, taped the snake to the wire, then pulled it through. I used PVC cement to make sure everything was nice and tight, then pulled the rest of the wire through the last electrical box. Then just like that, all the electrical was ran in the walls and ready for the next step. Now that the electrical's finished up, it's time to finish installing the rest of the sheathing. I'm using cheap 1/2-inch OSB because it's going to be covered with stucco that I'll show you later on in the video. Since we're going to be installing a grill in this patio, we decided to use some of this concrete cement board and put it on all the spots that'll be next to the grill to help prevent the fire. This stuff cuts kind of like sheetrock. You just strike a line with your razor blade, snap it with your hand, then that's it. But this is one of those projects that my wife and I thought would only take 2 weeks, and here we are 6 weeks later and we're still not done. There was just so much we didn't take into consideration at first, like how long things take to come in the mail, how long it takes for cement to dry, and what kind of tile we're going to pick out. Have you ever tried picking tile out with your wife? It's a freaking process to say the least. But after a week of trying to figure it out, we both came out on the other side unscathed, untouched, and ready to work. The grill's gonna go up against the wall that we're sheathing, so we decided to add some tile work and a hood system so it can suck the smoke out. So I had to drill a hole in the center of the wall for the exhaust. Now that we finished sheathing, it's time to prep the wall so we can do some tile work. We made sure this piece of 1/2-inch OSB was perfectly level, then screwed it into the wall. because it's going to work as a guide to make sure our tiles start off nice and level. We then cut our tile edge trim and got the mortar ready because it was time to lay some tile. I started off by spreading a thin layer of mortar all the way up to the top of the wall so I can install my tile edge trim. You basically just stick the trim edge to the mortar, make sure it's level, then haul ass doing tile work all the way till you get to the top before the mortar dries, just in case you need to shift the trim edge. And if you've never done tile work before and you want to do it, don't be scared. As long as you do your research and you prep properly, you're going to be fine. And having a laser level helps tremendously, but I don't have one, so I'm doing it the ghetto way, which will also work just fine. All the tiles, mortar, grout, and trim pieces ran me $344, which brings the total to $6,377. And I'll link all the materials in the description just in case you want to do this yourself. After doing a couple of rows, I made sure they were nice and level, then repeated the same process over and over, all the way till we got to the top. And I'm not gonna lie, my wife and I had a blast doing this together. We talked about a bunch of stuff and it was a pretty nice moment, not to get too touchy. To cut the tiles, we used this manual tile cutter that we got from Lowe's, and it worked just as good as one of those expensive tile cutters that shoot water everywhere, except this thing's much cheaper and there's no water mess, so if you're gonna do tile work, get yourself a manual one because it works just as good. But then just like that, the entire wall was all tiled up. Now that we let the mortar set overnight, we had to remove the spacers so we can grout in between the tiles. To do this, we used bright white sanded grout, then poured it into a 5-gallon bucket and put water over it, then mixed it until it was the consistency of something like peanut butter. We then used a plastic spatula and went to town filling in all the cracks, but working in small sections at a time because you don't want this stuff to dry onto the tile. And the day we were doing this, it was 102 degrees out, which made the grout dry so much quicker. So I continued to work in small sections while my wife used a damp sponge to get rid of the excess. Then I had my son come over so I can teach him a little bit about tile work so he's not completely clueless when he grows up. I then finished off the top part of the wall, then came back an hour later with a damp microfiber to remove any excess grout. But now that the tiled wall's all finished up, I had to install an outlet that the hood's gonna plug into. And I'm using a water resistant outlet with a waterproof flip cover, which should work just fine because I'm not expecting this area to get any rain or moisture because it is completely covered. But I then made some marks so I can drill a hole using a masonry drill bit so I can install my hood. I then clipped the hood system onto the screws, plugged it in, then ran the ducting to the outside. I next put on the top piece to hide the ducting, then went outside and installed the vent cover. I then removed the plastic, installed the screens, made sure it worked, then just like that, the hood system was all installed. Now that the hood system's all finished up, we decided to add another tile wall because we had some leftover tile. All we had to do was buy another trim piece and some more mortar, and we practically get another tile wall for almost no cost. And we ended up getting super lucky because these tiles literally fit perfect, so there was no need to cut any. Since we bought our house, we've been non-stop doing project after project, and people keep asking us how the heck we do it. And the short answer is having a proper work-life balance. But to stay even more on top of it, we drink AG1 every day, which is the sponsor of this video. AG1 is a daily nutritional supplement that supports your whole body health in one easy step. You just mix 1 scoop with 12 ounces of water or juice, give it a shake, and you're good to go. And this stuff helps keep me going all day with its blend of focus and energy vitamins. It supports my immune system, has pre and probiotics, and tastes really good too. They also offer D3 and K2 drops to help support your bones, and travel packets that are perfect for staying consistent while traveling or on vacation. I've been drinking AG1 for a little over a month now, and I feel like $1,000,000. Check out the link below to get a free bottle of vitamin D3 K2 and 5 extra travel packets of AG1 with your first purchase. And thank you AG1 for sponsoring this video. Now that the tiled wall's finished up, we're stapling on this metal netting onto the sheathing because it's going to help the stucco stick to the wall easier and not crack over time. We picked up a couple bags of stucco, then mixed them with water in a 5-gallon bucket till we got a peanut butter consistency. I then started from the bottom and worked my way up in thin layers, then repeated the process over and over until all the stucco was all finished up. It took us about 7 hours to put on the first layer, including the metal netting, but this was one of those things that was so satisfying to do, and we really just had a good time doing it. Once we finished the first layer, we let it sit for about 20 minutes, then used this little comb thingy that I made to draw a bunch of lines in it so when we put on the next layer, it'll stick properly. And while the stucco dried, I went ahead and started framing out the spot for the trash can. And the reason I didn't frame this out earlier in the video is because the trash can hadn't come in the mail yet, and I really wanted exact measurements before I framed it out. I then stapled down some more netting so I can stucco this wall as well. And at this point in the build, we've spent $6,922, including the stucco, the netting, and the trash can. And I was starting to get worried because I really wanted to stay under 10 grand for the entire project, and I was getting really close to there, so we'll see in the end of the video what the final price is. But once I finished stuccoing the wall with the trash can, I let them sit for a couple days so I can add the final layer. This took quite a bit of time to do because it's the finished layer, but I took my time because I really wanted it to come out as nice as possible. And like I said, I didn't want to frame anything out until I had things in the mail, which is why I wasn't able to frame around where the grill's gonna go, but once I got it in the mail and I knew the exact measurements, I went ahead and framed out this part too. I used regular sheathing for the front side of the island, but this side here, I went ahead and installed some more of the cement board because the grill's gonna butt right up to it. After I finished stuccoing, I went ahead and framed out the other side. It's gonna butt up to the other side of the grill, and it's also gonna have a refrigerator underneath. And I used pressure treated wood for this entire build to try to make everything as water resistant as possible, even though I'm not expecting too much rain to come in here in the first place. But then just like that, the island was finished up and ready for a countertop. Now that the stucco's all finished up, we're gonna let it dry for a couple days and build a countertop. We started off by picking up a few sheets of 1/2-inch hardy board, making some measurements, then cutting it out with a skill saw. And the reason we're doing this is because we've decided to pour our own concrete countertop because we just like the way that it looks. We measured and carefully cut out each piece and put them in their place before screwing anything in. We then made sure everything was as close to level as possible, ran a chalk line, then screwed everything in on the chalk line mark. We also added duct tape to the cracks to make sure no concrete leaks through while it's wet. Then picked up these concrete countertop molds, cut them to size, and screwed them directly into the hardy board. These are pretty cool because once the countertop dries, you just snap them off and that's it. We had to miter cut all the edges, but there was still a tiny little crack that you can see through, so we added some duct tape there to make sure none of the concrete leaks out. And since there's going to be a 12-inch overhang, we added some of these 2x4s as support until the countertop dries. To make sure the countertop doesn't crack, we had some leftover netting from the stucco, so we decided to use it on the countertop. Then it was time to pour the countertop, so we picked up 6 bags of this Quikrete Pro Finish 5000, mixed the crap out of it, then started pouring it into the mold. And I made the first batch a little thick, so I went ahead and made sure that the rest of the batches were more liquidy to try to make sure there's not as many air bubbles into it to give us a nice smooth finish. And of course I had to have my son come help. I swear by the time this kid's 20, he's gonna be a freaking professional in so many different things. And I know it was only 6 bags of concrete, but mixing them by hand was a crap ton of work to the point where I wish I would have just rented one of those concrete mixing machines. I then used this 1x4 to help me make the concrete look nice and flat, worked it a little bit until it looked like this, let it sit for about 4 hours, then came back to flatten out any high spots with a water bottle, and I'll tell you, this is definitely the most important step if you want to get a nice flat countertop. After waiting a couple days, the countertops were nice and dry, and it was time to remove the forms. I removed the tape, then pulled down the forms until they snapped off. And this part was so freaking satisfying, made it feel like all the work was totally worth it. We did find a couple of bubbles on the edges, but we're still super satisfied with the way this thing turned out. But then just like that, the countertop was all finished up. Now that the countertop's finished up and the stucco's been sitting for about 5 days, it's time to paint it. The color's called Balanced Beige, and we chose it because it's going to give the room a nice calm feel. So far in the build, we've spent $8,682, and that includes all the materials for the countertop, the stucco paint, the grill that we're going to show you later on in the video, and the fridge. And while Hope finished painting, I had to cut out these pressure treated 2x6s that I've been having dry out in my garage for the past 2 months. And the reason I dried them out so well is because pressure treated wood is really moist, and I'm going to be staining this wood, so I wanted it to be as dry as possible so the stain sticks properly. I painted on a thick ass layer of stain, then let it set up overnight. The next day I installed them onto the ledges using some construction adhesive because I don't want to see any screws, but if they warp over time I'll go ahead and screw them down just to make them last as long as possible. After installing all the ledges, I decided to add an LED strip underneath the countertop just to give it that extra pop. Once the LEDs were finished up, it was time to install this expensive ass trash can. This thing was like $300 and that's on the cheaper side of slide out patio trash cans. After installing the trash can, I went ahead and installed another one of those water resistant outlets, then slid the grill into its place, and at this point things were really starting to come together. We also went ahead and installed the refrigerator. I then climbed on top of the counter and made some measurements so we can install some more lighting. We just felt like the space looked a little empty, so we decided to add some pendant lights. So we drilled some holes and snaked the wire to the ceiling light so everything will be on the same switch. After wiring up the pendant lights, I went ahead and finished wiring them to the other light while Hope installed the light bulbs. We then made sure they worked, and while I was up there I decided to install a fire alarm because at the end of the day there is a grill underneath the second floor of my house and I don't want it to burn down. And we also added a fire extinguisher. But I then did some caulking around the spots that needed it. Then swept the floor really well so I can install the patio furniture that I picked up from Lowe's. This patio furniture ran us exactly $400, and to us it was totally worth it because it's really well built and designed to be outside. And it looks pretty badass too. I'll link them down in the description below. But now that the patio is almost finished up, it's time to install the sprinklers. When we first bought the house, the first thing we wanted to do was install some sprinklers, but then we spiraled out of control and ended up building a fence, a gym, a shed, a patio, and now we're finally doing the sprinklers. We rented this machine so we can dig a trench, which ran us $175, but it was totally worth it because we did the entire yard in just 20 minutes. Then my neighbor Tom came over to help out, so we spread out a bunch of 1-inch PVC pipes and basically built the entire sprinkler system above ground before we put it into the trench. We used primer and PVC cement and gave every sprinkler head a shutoff valve, then used a ton of Teflon tape to connect the hose that came with the sprinkler head to the PVC. To make sure I can flush out the system in the winter time so the pipes don't freeze, I built this valve that I can connect my air compressor to, so I can shoot compressed air through the pipes and drain them. I then connected the air compressor valve closest to the house, then put the access box over it to make sure that it fits, finished running the rest of the PVC to my water supply, then turned on the water for about 5 minutes to flush out any dirt and debris that may have got into the system because we don't want it in the sprinkler heads. And for the sprinkler heads, we went with a company called IrriGreen because they make the most badass sprinkler system on the market. And the reason I think they're the best is because I'm going to be able to water all the grass in my backyard with just 2 sprinkler heads. With a normal sprinkler system, I would need like 20 sprinkler heads to water all my grass, which is a lot more work to install and consumes a lot more water. But that's not the case with the system, and I'll show you why in a minute. After connecting the sprinkler heads and running the wires, we made sure the system had no leaks, then we went ahead and buried it. We then had to install the sprinkler controller, which is a super easy plug and play system. You just screw this bracket into the house, install the box, and make sure you're near an electrical supply and some Wi-Fi. This is a smart sprinkler system that you can calibrate to the shape of your yard, so it'll only spray water in the areas that you want it to. Each sprinkler head can shoot up to 30 feet in any direction, and if it's about to rain and your sprinkler system is scheduled to turn on, it'll track the weather and tell your sprinklers not to turn on so Mother Nature can water your grass for you. After installing the sprinklers, you just download their app and pin a dot wherever you want the sprinklers to spray, and that's it. I'll link them in the description below just in case you want to get yourself one. But now that the sprinklers are all finished up, we wanted to install some string lights in between the patio and the gym that we built in a previous video. I drilled some holes and used these eye hooks as an anchoring point, used a zip tie to connect them to the hooks, and ran them from the patio to the gym. Then just like that, the entire patio and sprinklers were all finished up. A little over a month and a half to complete and cost us a total of $9,412.